Hot take. Why growing up Catholic kinda made me a witch. Yeah, I went there. I said it. Catholics literally drink wine as the blood of Christ and eat bread as his body. It's pretty metal and pretty witchy. Catholics use robes, candles, Latin chants, specific movements, sacred objects. Sound familiar? Repeating prayers, casting spells, the rosary, a string of spell beads with focused intention, the use of holy oils, oils for spells, anointing with oil, a ritual blessing, incense used in mass to cleanse a space and call in the divine, just like in witchcraft. Holy water, moon water, crucifixes, sacred hearts, saints with glowing halos, blood, wound, daggers, roses. Iconography is everything. Does anyone ever feel like priests, nuns, cardinals, bishops, popes are kind of like a coven? The wheel of the year, but make it Catholic. All Saints' Day, Lent, Advent. Every season has a spiritual significance, just like witches. Miracles and
Then there's Tenochtitlan. She is seen as Mother Earth, bringer of maize, the emerald goddess. Her temple was set upon the same mountain where Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared. The Spanish had destroyed it in their attempt to convert the Nahua to Catholicism. She appeared to a native, and her message was for the people. She told him, "If you love me, trust me, and believe in me, I will respond." She is seen with a black sash, which in Aztec culture represents fertility. The 4-petal flower is placed on her dress, which represents divinity. The divine feminine is always there for her people, especially those who have been oppressed or stripped of their rights, as man and the church have also done to her, as well as so many indigenous cultures.
So people say to me, "You're a witch. God said in the Bible that witches are evil. God said don't do magic and witchcraft. God didn't say that. I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to give you proof. God didn't say that. A 2,000-year-old book that most Christians do not know where it came from or who wrote it said that. And why? Did they go deep into research to discover why does this book say that? Who wrote that? And should I follow it? I'm going to tell you something that is quite shocking. From Joel Baden, professor of divinity. Well, he's a professor of Hebrew Bible at Yale Divinity School. He said the Bible wasn't written for us. He said this is a professor of Hebrew Bible. He said the Bible isn't a spiritual book. The Bible isn't a holy book. He said the Bible is literature. The Bible is literature. Think on that. Meditate on that. What? He further said, no one who wrote part of the Bible thought they were writing a Bible. Meditate on that. Meditate on that. No one who wrote what we currently have in the Bible thought they were writing a Bible. They were writing letters. They were writing literature. They were writing sometimes reworked Homer. They were writing ancient Sumerian legends and tales and mythologies with truths mattered in.
Welcome back, you cosmic baddies. Welcome. Hello. I welcome you back. If you're new here, hi, my name's Katherine. I am the podcast host of Chakras and Cusswords, and today's episode is all about getting into the energy of Catholics being the most witchiest fucking religion there is out there. And how come? Why is it so witchy? Like, what is it about Catholicism that's so fucking witchy? I just don't get it. And it's been something that I have been learning about, I've been studying, and I've been kind of taking in, because I do love the energy of the witch. I love the energy of the old stories. I even love the energy of some of the Bible stories, some of the biblical stories that come out in, I guess you could say, in modern day alchemy. I am a fond believer that energy moves in repetitive circles. And the energy that we've experienced, if it's through religion, if it's through spirituality, if it's through movement of being around nature, tends to kind of like repeat itself. And one of the things that I was noticing was I felt like there was so much repetitive nature when it came to Catholicism and the energy of the witch. And I know there's like huge history. There's like so many history lessons behind this. And we're going to get into some of this. But I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. I grew up Catholic. Okay, guys. I was baptized at like 3 or 4 days old, definitely my first week of life, because my parents thought I was going to pass away because I had this horrible heart defect that meant I needed surgery. And the doctors were kind of like, she has to get bigger before she has this surgery. And there's a chance that she could die. There's also a chance that she could die when she does have the surgery. But there is a chance that something awful can happen to your child because she needs to gain weight. So before my parents, put on this journey of taking care of this very sick child, they decided to baptize me. Now, my mom is a Catholic. So is my dad. My mom's Italian. My dad is Mexican. So the energy of Catholicism is fucking deeply rooted in these two cultures. My mom was basically a practicing Catholic in some aspects. Like, she was married 3 times. I believe never in the church. And the one time that I asked her, like, why'd you get married so young? She was like, because I wanted to have sex. She even acknowledged like she was having premarital sex, whatever, right? My dad was kind of forced, I guess you could say, into religion. He never was religious. He never went to church. He was always kind of like the bad boy. My dad was definitely the bad boy of his family. But the energy of the church and the energy of the religion definitely played a lot of patterns in my life, and it played out with movement. If that's God, if that's the universe, it definitely had a repetitive energy and pattern that kept coming up in my life. So my parents both decided to put me in this Catholic like summer camp. And I did this summer camp for many years. Okay. Now I would say I was always like that kid that had like a lot of questions, and you could tell like people were like, why does this kid have so many fucking questions? But I was always kind of like that kid who had a lot of questions. And I remember I was like, Mom, why am I in this summer group? And you don't even go to church. You don't go to church. I don't get it. Like, we do not go to church. And I'm in this fucking Catholic summer group, right? And she's like, well, it was the most affordable. And I tried to get like her acknowledgement of like, where was she with religion? And my mom was like not religious, like I said, but she was baptized Catholic. And I guess she felt like it was important for me to be baptized Catholic. But her understanding was she didn't agree with the church on many things, but it was some energy of, I guess, faith. So for the most part, we didn't practice religion growing up in my house, even though we were baptized. And yes, I did baptize my kids because to me, I felt like it's an acknowledgement of spiritual blessings, and it is an energy of, I guess you could say, energy of movement into the area of what's sacred. And it was the religion that I felt closest to. So why do Catholics and witches feel almost parallel together? Why is there such a about the two. Well, rituals are everywhere in the Catholic religion. The energy of incense, candles, possessions, ritual gestures, the sign of the cross, and sacred objects. These look very ceremonial, and they also really stand in the presence of magic because that energy feels so grand. Now, my father, for like the past, I guess you could say the past reference of my father's, he is a artist. He does a lot with glass, and he's actually a stained glass artist. So he would do many churches. And I remember like when you walk into like a big, and he would do like churches in Oakland. And when you would walk into like one of those big churches in Oakland, like St. Elizabeth's or like St. Anthony's, and you would just feel the presence of something like so fucking magical and beautiful. Like you would just have the stained glass windows. It was just like fucking breathtaking. And I'm not going to say that I think that Catholics have played the card well, but they definitely have played the hand well, because there is something about walking into the element of the church that just feels like, oh, wow, okay, if God is here, he must be here, right? And you have to remember, like, it's very sacred. The symbols, the altars, the statues, the icons, the shrines, the spaces, the area of candles, the relics, all of the things, all the talismans, the priest. It's like this folklore that just continues to ascend and move forward. Definitely, we have to remember that Catholics are very different than Christians. They are Christian, they believe Jesus is the Son of God, but they're different than like modern Christians. I don't know, like modern day Christians. I don't know. And they're different in the areas where they have a lot more of trinkets. They have a lot more of trinkets, right? They have a lot more of mantras. They have a lot more of like rosaries and repetitive prayers. And a lot of it has to do with the Catholic background of Catholic patterns and rituals that took place, and the energy of repetitive that came from the cultures of Latin America, the Caribbean, and certain parts of Europe and Africa. So the Catholic saints and the area around the Catholic saints came from indigenous practices and African blended spiritual practices. And a lot of times, they would hide their deities, they would hide their gods, their goddesses into the energy of the saints, right? So we would still see that worship that a lot of the old deities or the old gods continued to move forward with, because they were being hidden in the statues, in the candles of a lot of the Catholic saints, because they did embody a lot of the spiritual blessings or the energy of magic that those old deities had. So for instance, we have to remember that the Catholics also use the energy of element. They have a lot of energy of element. They have the holy water, they have the fire, they have the air, the smoke, and they also have the earth. Catholics are very tactile in magic, okay? A priest is the only one who could really do a true exorcism, okay? Nobody else can really do a true exorcism, so they say, right? And that's a clearing in some aspects, a clearing of negative energies, of demonic energies, but it is a priest that can do the exorcism. They have their blessed oils, their anointing oils, the area of physical acts and movement, and the area of theory is that Catholics are a organized religion that is centered off of the Trinity, the energy of three, the energy of sacraments, and they really doctrine a lot of the movements that came from witchcraft or the old patterns of the indigenous collective. A lot of times you'll hear the energy of prayer, the energy of meditation, of structures, of priests and bishops, the Vatican, praying around certain things, praying around certain objects. That could be an altar, that can be an energy of movement, of devotion around worship. While they are worshiping God in the aspect, they are also showing worship to certain altars or certain devotion or certain energy. Now, it's very fascinating how the historical culture and places really explore. So, for instance, the Marian devotion, the many faces of the Virgin, and how it like maps out with this goddess energy of like the Earth Mother archetype. And it also like reminds me of certain astrology, like the Virgo, the Virgin, the Virgo, the area of root base. It all comes from indigenous practices. The saints as the energy of standing in a pair with, I guess, not necessarily prophets of the community, but definitely spirits of the community. The Orishas, the spirits with the Catholic saints all kind of blend together. So this is how the early modern magic and folk religion really blurred in its lines of the modern day Catholic. Now, when Christianity, especially the church, now, we have to remember Christianity and the church are different, but especially with Catholicism, when the Catholicism took place, it spread into regions with strong existing spiritual systems. The church often allowed people to keep their rituals as long as they reframed them through the energy of the saints. So a lot of the indigenous people would hide or merge their deities together. For instance, the saints as being like almost like the face of what the protection was or what the energy of worship was, carried the movement of whatever it was that that individual was seeking. For instance, healing, traveling, protection. It really lined it up where it felt like a visual coding, right? A visual delusion or area where we replaced one deity with another saint. We replaced the energy of the deity with a saint. For instance, let's get into some of the saints, okay? So for instance, the goddess Bridget, who is known for fire, fertility, poetry in the Celtic tradition, became Saint Bridget of Kildare in Ireland. She kept her sacred fire that associates with the healing and the healing properties that Bridget had, the energy of many harvests and festivals, and reframed as the saint's feast day. So a lot of the pagan and Catholic kind of holidays like merge together. Also in Latin America and in the Caribbean, the Afro-Caribbean traditions like Santeria, voodoo from enslaved Africans were forced to practice. We have to remember the enslaved Africans and a lot of indigenous people were forced to practice Catholicism, okay? But they layered their orishas or their energies of law onto the saints. So Yamaya, the mother ocean goddess, often linked with the Virgin Mary, especially Our Lady of Regal, and Shango, the god of thunder, war, and fire, sometimes is paired with Saint Barbara, because there's some like images that kind of resemble it, but Shango is his own deity. It's just like the Orishas and Yamaya are their own deity, but a lot of times they would hide them. So it's shown with like a sword. When you look at Shangon, he was known as the energy of thunder, also luck, and he was often like resembled in this yellow energy. Kind of reminds me of the solar plex chakra, and it also kind of reminds me of the energy of movement. And a lot of times people would still want to worship him, pay homage to him, but they would do it in hiding of him into the energy of another saint. And some people believe it was Saint Barbara. Oshun, who was known as the river goddess, and she was structured around love and beauty and having a connection. A lot of people believe that she was kind of hidden in the energies of Our Lady of Charity. Now, in Mexico, the story of one of the most popular saints, or one of the most popular virgins, was La Virgen de Guadalupe, which carries deep, deep, deep Renaissance and similarities to Tonantzin, who was the Mixteca mother or the Aztec goddess of the earth. And both of these had like this very mother figure that was very transcendent to the energy of almost like the Virgin Mary. And she appeared on the sacred hillside and in front of a indigenous man. And she basically is the one who convinced, or really took in the channeling of telling the indigenous people, like, we have to build a church. So we merge the two communities of, I guess, the church and Catholicism with the indigenous practices. So lots of legends, lots of energies. In Brazil, the energy in Candomblé is where the Orishas were similarly as merged as well. So Osusi, the hunter forest goddess or god, was linked with Saint George, and Lemaja became tied to the Virgin Mary in many coastal shrines. So we see that the energy of the saints and the deities of water still merged into this energy of legend, because it was like the only ways that Catholic religion was able to control, these individuals were able to control the native and the indigenous population by emerging and forcing their areas of worship to kind of be intertwined with the church. So this was seen as a survival tactic, right? So a lot of the indigenous and enslaved people could preserve their deities and could preserve their energy, spirituality through Catholic worship without receiving punishment, without receiving beatings, without receiving separation from their families, whatever it was that the church was implying these unfortunately very unfortunate times for these people to go through. And the cultural continuity with their gods and spirits and practice fully never really ever disappeared, because the energy of the bruja, the energy of witchcraft, the energy of alchemy just shifted into different processes or different perspectives or different energies. The living traditions, even in today's folk Catholic practices, often still look very witchy because it was blended together. The spiritual work of altars, candles, offerings, petitions were all blended together. The eclipses, when we talk about Catholics, the Catholics do not care. Like, they are going to bring some fucking astrology up in this bitch while they tell everybody else to stay away from astrology. And we really see this with the energy of eclipses and the energy of astrology and astronomy that plays out in a lot of the stories of the religion. For instance, in ancient and pagan views and native and indigenous views, the eclipses were often seen as movements when the veil was thin between two worlds. It often felt like an omen or an ending. I know with a lot of the indigenous practices, the eclipses were seen as an omen, the ending of certain divine messages or certain divine times. In many traditions, they were feared, and they were seen as an energy of passing, or God could be angry. For instance, like when the eclipses, the solar eclipse would occur, a lot of the Mixtecas believed that the energy, or the Mayans would believe that the energy of some type of little demon or some type of little evil energy was coming and attacking the sun, and that's why it went dark. And it also respected the area of reset points. So a lot of times when is an eclipse, it is seen as a reset point, an energy of resetting. Now, the Vatican still uses eclipses, the equinoxes, and all that, okay? The church officially treated eclipses as natural astronomy, but in folk Catholicism, they still carry very heavy meaning. And the energy of the eclipses were interrupted and interpreted as divine warnings. So they were an interruption of the daily practices to be centered around divine warnings, tied into possible sin, the ruler's downfall, the calls. Priests often would weave the eclipses into certain events and certain sermons as proof of God's power, like the sun darkened at a crucifixion, right? For the energy of how mighty the Lord was. So there's a lot of practice in the Catholic community that would use the eclipse magic to create their own agendas. The equinox, too, also marked the balance of day and night being equal. In pagan and indigenous traditions, they celebrated the equinoxes as an agricultural turning point, which would mark certain harvests and festivals, and also center around planning and fertility in spring. And it would symbolically be the center of rebirth, balance, and areas of movement. The spring equinox got centered with the energy of Easter. The church decided to use the spring equinox because, it made sense. So the church decided that Easter would fall on the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. That kept the holiday linked to older fertility and renewal festivals that many pagans still practice to this day. So it's very interesting, right? The autumn equinox lines up with the feast of the Michaelmas, or St. Michael's Day of September 29th, which became a major marker of seasonal changes in the energy of the Europe festivals that took place. And we see how this energy just kind of intertwines as power and restructuring that the Catholic Church used. Now, when we are looking at pagan roots and Samhain was a Celtic festival that occurred on October 31st, marked the end of harvest and the start of the dark half of the year. So it's very interesting because, in all honesty, the Catholics are the ones who brought Halloween. It was believed that the veil between the living and the dead was the thinnest during this time, and the ancestors that Fae could move freely. So people would light bonfires. They wore, energies to like disguise themselves and ward off spirits, and they left offerings for the dead during this practice. It was also a time of devotion, love, harvest, and the energy of omens. Now, the Catholic layering of All Saints or All Souls Day in the energy of Christianity, the church first often placed these festivals as All Saints Day, November 1st, dedicated to honoring saints, known and unknown, that were baptized. The pagan idea of honoring the spirit kind of transcended into the church as well. All Souls Day added a later focus on the faithful departure of the ancestors and the energy of purgatory that was loved through many reflective presence. This mirrored the ancestors' Samhain traditions, right? And it also intertwined the area of Hallowtide or Dias de Muertos, Day of the Dead. It just had this uncanny movement of symbolism that continued to transcend. The night before All Saints Day is known as Halloween. It's just like so spooky, right? It's just so well planned. So the night before Halloween, or the night before All Saints Day, is Halloween. And many of these old pagan holidays were custom through survival of making costume masks, having trick-or-treating as being involved with souling, where the poor begged for food in exchange for prayers for the dead. Jack-o'-lantern seen as protective light, that definitely descended. So the veil thinning idea was carried through even many of the Catholic communities, that the veil is getting thinner and thinner. And we see how this energy continues to move forward in modern day, right? The energy of rituals, the energy of passage, the energy of celebration of the seasons, right? We have the season of fall related to All Saints Day, related to Halloween, related to Dia de los Muertos in a lot of the Latin communities and countries. So we really see how the altars for these traditions continue to still prevail in the test of time. They still prevail. And the focus is basically on spirit and the energy of the soul, the energy of seasonal transitions that remain deeply magical. We couldn't be doing this in the summer. It wouldn't feel right? The vibe wouldn't be right. So of course it is done during the energy of fall, the transition where everything is like a bridge, the honoring of giving permission, of having practices and keeping that energy of movement together. So Halloween, All Saints Day, the energy of the soul, the energy of spirits, the energy of movement is deeply rooted in the Catholic traditions that were stolen and used to merge together from indigenous practices. So that's why I always get so annoyed when people are like, you're practicing the devil's magic. You're practicing this energy of, this energy of darkness because you're not practicing Christianity. Okay, excuse me, people. Christianity kind of stole a lot of this stuff. So I'm just going to lay that out there. They stole a lot of the energy that the modern mystic practices today. So I want to thank everybody for listening to this podcast. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know what you think about this. And everybody have an amazing day. And don't forget to send and share this podcast with your witchy bestie. Bye.